Buon giorno. You're listening to Going, where God is at work, a podcast where cross-cultural workers discuss everything from faith and fear to finances and faux pas. We're walking out our call to ministry in faraway places and happy to have you join us on the journey. I'm your host, Jesse Pauly, missions leader serving in Rome, and I'm here with Jenn Williamson, our missiologist who lives and works in Lyon. And we're without our beloved pastor from Cisterna, Alessandro Di Leonardo. Hey, Jenn, how are you doing today?
Hi, Jesse. I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. This is going to be an interesting one. This is our first one without Alessandro. He's doing some traveling, so we'll see how this goes. Should be good.
Yeah, we've been on all the corners of the earth in the past few weeks between us, I think.
Seriously, we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
I think that's or a lot of the sky, I guess, too. Yeah, I just got back from the States, and interesting, good experience. But we did a lot of speaking engagements, a lot of visiting in the just about 5 weeks that we were there. So
Nice. It's always good to go back and visit and catch up. And yeah, it's always good to come home too.
yes, we're super glad to be back. Well, we're gonna continue and jump right into our series this on what it looks like to do missions with. Again, we're basing this off of Jenn's dissertation, which we can make available if you would like to read it. It would be great. But each episode, we're kind of tackling different aspects of that. And today, we're going to talk about what does it look like, and how do we define success in missions. So maybe just to kick us off, I don't know if you have an idea of success or how you would define success. I have an interesting story, and maybe I'll share that first, and then we can get into it.
Yeah.
But
go ahead.
When I was in a missions committee at a local church right before I started Bible college, and then I stayed on the missions committee during Bible college. But we had a missionary visiting us from Europe who had been a missionary with the church for a long time. And she came and she shared about what she was doing. She was in a support role at a church, helping with kids ministry and women's ministry, and part of their camps in the summer and all this kind of stuff. And we had a lunch with or a breakfast with her, and then she left. And the following week we had our regular monthly missions meeting, and some different members were bringing up, why do we support her? It doesn't seem like she's not seeing anything happen. Why are we continuing to support her after all these years? And as someone who kind of knew that I was going in that direction of pursuing missions, it kind of scared me. I kind of started to think like, oh man, like this is what they're, what do I have to prove to maintain the financial support from a church? But I was really encouraged by one of the guys on the committee who kind of stepped up and he said, in business, we have to define success, what it's going to look like for us. We lay out what we're trying to see accomplished, and then if we see that accomplished, we know we were successful or not. And so he kind of challenged the group to think, what does success mean for missionaries? And do we know if for her what she's been doing has been successful or not, or are we just kind of applying a generalized idea of what success in missions looks like to everybody, and then saying, okay, she's falling short in that regard. And so that really was eye-opening for me, and something that has continued to be at the forefront of my mind as I lead different missionaries.
Yeah, that's true. Success is hard to define, I think, in missions. For me, I think there's a cultural aspect to succeeding. That is, am I assimilated well and assimilating well into my culture? I think it is, yes, am I intentional about bearing witness to the work of God in my life with those around me in word and in deed? And I think success looks like walking, when Jesus says, take my yoke upon you. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. I think it looks like walking at the rhythm of Christ, and not being overwhelmed by the task, which is easy to do because I realize I'm not the one bearing the burden. He's the one bearing the burden.
Yeah.
But not lagging behind either. And and just, sitting back and doing nothing. So I think it's for me, success is, yeah, moving at the rhythm of Christ and in faithfulness with him. Yeah.
Would you have?
How about you?
Do you think you would have said that even back in your days as a pastor back in the Pacific Northwest,
Mm,
or has that changed over
yeah,
time?
it's a good question. That's a good question. I definitely think that I have grown and evolved. I do, it's a fine line, right? Because I think we can all get complacent.
Hmm.
We can all get assimilated into what is, and what I think does characterize us as missionaries or those with a call to missions is sort of a holy discontent with the status quo that keeps us driving forward towards, the kingdom,
Yeah.
proclaiming the kingdom, announcing the kingdom, um, witnessing to the work of God. And so I think if we become complacent and lose that discontent with the status quo, we can lose a degree of our effectiveness.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I was just thinking.
yeah.
I asked that because you were in a people role before. You were working with people in ministry.
Hmm.
I was
Yep.
before doing this. I was working in a type of ministry, but it was more geared around numbers. I was basically running a nonprofit thrift store, and so I had
Hmm.
to. I mean, I had a very clear task. I had to make sure all of the donations were processed and weighed
Right.
and accounted for every day. And so, but at the end of the day, I knew I was successful if I finished that
Right.
and I got all of them sorted and I put
Right.
it all away. But now coming into missions role and being a missionary, I've found that very
Yeah.
difficult to define success and to figure out what
Mm.
that is.
Yeah.
Why do you think
Yeah, I
that
think that's
is?
the trick. Yeah, because like you said, no matter how many we work hours we work in a day, when we're in ministry, we don't have anything concrete at the end of the day. I can't say I made 20 widgets.
Yeah.
I can't say, this car was broken down and not running when it came in to the shop, and at the end of the day, this car was running great. We work with people, and people are complex, and they grow and develop in sort of a wide spectrum of skills and character traits and their knowledge, and it's throughout the whole course of their lives. And even we can grow and we can also digress
Mm.
as humans. So transformation and formation is, it's multidimensional, it's multifaceted, it's multidirectional. And so if I'm trying to measure my effectiveness as one who is investing in the lives of others, it's just hard to do. And in missions, there's generally been two schools of thought that have developed around how are we going to measure effectiveness? How are we going to know if missionaries are successful or
Mm.
effective at what they're doing? And those two schools of thought are, we can either measure fruitfulness or we can measure faithfulness. So fruitfulness is the outputs. It's the questions like, how many people came to faith this month?
How many baptisms
Um,
do you
how
have?
how many baptisms did your church have? How many sermons did you preach? How many? No, that would be more faithfulness. Fruitfulness would be, it has to do with the response to the work that we're doing. So, how many people came to your Bible study? How many people attended your event? How many people raised their hand in response to this or that? Um, and and fruitfulness is an important thing to measure. But at the end of the day, it's really measuring God's work. What those are the things that God stirs hearts. God changes people. God brings people to faith. Um, so so then we can say, oh, we can't measure that. We can only measure our faithfulness, which is, how many sermons did I preach? How many times did I share the gospel? How many pamphlets did I hand out? That, I don't think we do that anymore. How many, but my faithfulness in just doing the work. And so there's some who say, no, we just need to measure our faithfulness. We need to measure, how much work we're doing. Um, the challenge with that is we can be faithfully doing the wrong things.
Mm.
We can be barking up the wrong trees. We can be faithfully doing things in the wrong ways. And so if we're not measuring fruitfulness, even though that depends on God, we often aren't aware of whether our faithfulness is faithfulness in the right places or in the right ways or with the right things. So I don't know, Jesse. Your mission organization, I imagine, has missionaries report every month. Well, we're in the same mission organization, so I know they do. We have to give reporting. Um,
Yes.
would you say that our metrics are more focused on fruitfulness or on faithfulness? Can you give us some
Yeah.
examples of the
Yeah.
questions that we generally have to respond to in reporting our effectiveness to our mission agency?
That's a good question. I've been with our organization for like 5 years now, 6 years or something like that. And I can say from the beginning, I've only heard complaints and frustration and difficulty, and they're always trying to work on this. I've recently heard that they're trying to work on this again in another way.
Oh, wow.
But currently,
Yeah.
it's questions like, how have you been working? Have you seen God working in and through you? So that's kind of open ended question.
Hmm.
But then there's a series of questions like, how many outreach events have you done in the last 2 months? How many gospel conversations in the last 2 months? Um, of those, how many were new? How many were, already people you've talked to? Then
So
like,
those are good faithfulness questions. How are we being faithful in sharing the gospel?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think, yeah, I don't think we have any questions around like the number of baptisms or uh,
We do have how many churches planted, I
yeah,
think.
churches planted, and there's like a question of like how many new believers. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. New believers. Those would be fruitfulness
yeah,
questions. Yeah.
but I would say probably more faithfulness questions than fruitfulness. I would say.
Yeah. I think that, like I said, I think we need both. So as a missions leader, you're a field leader. Imagine I'm on your team, Jesse, and you're looking at the metrics that I filled out over the course of the past year. And in the past year, you can see that I've had 100 gospel conversations
Okay.
with at least 50 people, which means with some people I'm having multiple gospel conversations, some of the same people. That's okay this year. But in that whole year, I've seen 0 people come to faith. I've had 0 new people come to the Bible studies that I'm leading or the Discovery Bible studies. I've seen 0 baptisms. What kinds of questions might you ask me to try to explain why my faithfulness in sharing the gospel isn't resulting in fruitfulness in terms of new life in Christ?
Yeah, that scenario is hard to somewhat complicated. I think we're given for granted a lot of
Mhm.
things.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
have to
yeah,
give
for
for
sure.
assume a lot of things like that. I know the situation well, the person well, what their life is like. But I think probably I would stir the conversation or direct the conversation to try and understand how can we look at how effective they're being, because they're clearly being faithful. um, and I think the other part, as I thought about this question, is sometimes we might not even know if what we're doing, especially when we don't see fruit, it might be hard to discern, is this something I need to keep doing, or is this dust my sandals and go to a new place or do something new. Um, And so I think bringing in the idea
Mm.
of
Mhm.
communicating with a local
Mhm.
national partner, someone that you trust, someone that knows your ministry, knows you in and out,
Mhm.
I think I would direct the conversation towards, what are they saying? What are they
Mhm.
thinking? Are they have they been trying to encourage you to do
Yeah.
something different, and you kind of have been stuck on what you think is your thing?
Mhm.
Or maybe they're encouraging you and they're
That's
saying, yeah,
good.
keep doing that, keep going. And it is a question of perseverance and just trying to. So I think after a year, though, it would probably be a good time as a leader to start saying, okay, how can we evaluate? How can we take time to maybe evaluate and um, think about what is
Right.
working, or is this
But no, but
working?
like
That's even that's a
for
hard word to use, but
example,
yeah,
I said the thing about pamphlets, nobody does pamphlets anymore, but imagine that I was saying, "Hey, no, I go to the college campus. I'm there 5 days a week. I set up a booth and I really try to talk to students. I'm being really faithful in something, but maybe my method is dated. Um, maybe, that's not the place students are
yeah,
gathering. Maybe a booth isn't the thing that's gonna build relationship, so I do think
Yeah.
what you're saying, like, yeah, what are your partners saying? Those are good questions. But also sort of analyzing, is it culturally relevant? Whether we're talking culture of, which country you're in, or culture of,
Hmm.
where are college students hanging out these days and what are they caring about? And yeah, what's
Yeah.
the venue? Mhm.
Yeah, and I think too, trying to see what's the need. Sometimes we have an idea of what we should do, but then when you try and meet a
Yeah.
need of a place, and you have more access. But I would say, this idea of keeping track of what you've been doing is
Yeah, I
it's
agree.
helpful to ask those questions. You know, because I think if we didn't know, like if I wouldn't know, oh yeah, she's shared 100 gospel conversations, and then you know
Yeah.
it would be hard to even know what have you doing. So I think keeping, you know, I don't know, the idea of metrics is complicated and challenging to interpret, but um, yeah, I think we should I think they're
Yeah, I
needed.
do.
I don't know, Jen,
Mhm.
what do you think? Like, should we bother doing them? Is
There's
it
a
too
big
complicated
temptation
to
to
sort
throw the
out?
baby out with the bathwater, and I think many organizations either don't measure them or rely completely on anecdote, and that is anecdotes are great, sharing stories. I think it's great that our metrics, for example, have the opportunity to tell a story. They can get at something deeper, and they can put some flesh on the bones in terms of what's actually happening on the ground. Um, but I think metrics matter. We have parables in the Bible where Jesus talks about measuring, the parable of the stewards and the talents, and and they're giving an account. They've said, Jesus says, hey, the master entrusted them with something, and then comes back and asks, what did you do with it? And as missionaries, we're entrusted not only with um donations from people who give out of what they have, that we can do this work right now, but with certain talents and abilities and opportunities. God is entrusting us with something, and I think it's reasonable to think that we should be accountable for how we're stewarding those gifts through some sort of measurement and some sort of question. But once I was attending a conference that was actually all about metrics and measuring, and there's something that came away that really
Oh,
stayed with me for a long time, and I resonates with me still today. And it said, if we don't measure what matters, what we measure will become what matters. So if I'm being asked every
hmm.
month, just how many gospel conversations did I have? Then I'm going to just have gospel conversations. Well, what if I am serving in a place like Lesbos, where there's refugees coming in that are hungry, that need clothing, that need demonstrations of God's mercy and provision in their lives? But all I'm going to do is share the gospel with them and ignore all of these other needs, because that's the only metric that's being measured in my organization. And so if I feed 1,000 people, but only share the gospel twice, then my metrics are going to look really bad. So we have to think about what we're asking in our metrics, so that the things that we're measuring, we're saying this is where we want you investing, because otherwise people will invest in in those things. So we have to measure what matters, or because what we measure will become what matters to people. So if our organization is only counting churches planted, but maybe not counting new Bible studies started, then everyone could start to focus towards getting a church planted, and ignoring the fact that starting Bible studies could actually be a pathway to get there. Or we can miss also the phases or steps that we can be measuring in the process. So I think we need to do it, one, because Jesus did it, two, or at least Jesus taught about it. No, Jesus even did it when he sent the 72 out, and they came back and he said, hey, tell me what happened. And they debriefed and they talked about it. And then what's interesting is they got a little
Yeah.
excited about, hey, we saw people healed, and boy, we cast out demons. And then Jesus says, okay, remember, rejoice that your names are written in the book of life. So also we have to remember that we're being transformed in this process. We are part of what can be measured as, how am I growing? How am I being made more like Jesus? How am I personally being redeemed as I engage in these things? I think it's good to be accountable to the people that are supporting us, to be honest and transparent, as we talked about in our last episode about newsletters and things like that. I think the accountability piece of metrics is helpful. And I think metrics help us get better at what we're doing. Back to the scenario we talked about. If I'm being really faithful and doing things and there's actually not any movement, yes, sometimes God might call us to persevere for a really long time before we see results. But we want to discern that that's what's being asked of us and stay faithful in it because we're convinced that that's what God's asking of us, and not just stay in it because it's the only thing we know how to do and we don't have the energy to be creative or to think differently or to attempt something else. And so metrics at least give us the space to say, am I being called to stick to this and to just stay faithful? Or maybe might this be a time to step back and say, God, is there something else? Is there a different way? Is there a new perspective? Is it time to, as you said, dust dust my sandals off and move on?
Yeah. And it's interesting, I think, too, you know, the combination of fruitfulness and faithfulness is helpful in different areas. Like the idea um, of keeping track of those different metrics are a benefit not only to, like you were saying, accountability and those things, but there is a benefit to reporting back and
Mm-hmm.
letting people that are invested in our ministry know. And I think, it's interesting, when I was going around the States, there was one church in particular that I noticed. It was just so interesting. I was reminded of how, speaking to the cultural piece, how different cultures have different
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
values for numbers or for metrics. And this church in the back by the exit had a big board where they put every week their attendance numbers
Mm-hmm.
and their giving numbers. So how much was given the previous week and how many people attended church the previous week.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of the culture, of that church, that, they value that. And so it is good to be able to know and to use those things and to say, and um, I'm being faithful. And it's not, I'm being faithful,
Right.
but nothing's happening. I think seeing those things as working together
Right.
and not one being
Yeah.
versus the
Have you
other
ever had
is
a,
so
a time
important and
when,
helpful.
as you were filling out your metrics, um you were either encouraged or discouraged, or you realized something that maybe you hadn't noticed?
Yeah. Um, I think one of the things that's been interesting
Mm-hmm.
to try and figure out is, as I've stepped into leadership, my time on the front lines, quote unquote, is reduced because I'm doing a lot more of leading others and meeting with other missionaries. And so I came to the realization recently, as I've been telling people about different success stories, that even if I'm not the person directly
Yeah.
involved, I'm part of helping those things happen
Right.
because I'm part of encouraging those people. And so sometimes my personal metrics might
Right.
look lower than I would prefer. Um, but when I think of the influence I'm having by encouraging and caring for and leading the other missionaries on our field, then I'm
Yeah.
encouraged to see, okay, we have missionaries that are, that are staying on the field.
Yeah.
We're not seeing a high turnover rate right now, and that are seeing
Yeah.
fruit in their ministry and
That's a good
progress.
point.
And so I
Yeah,
think
because it's
that's been really
multi-layered.
helpful.
Because some people, their gifts are more in administration, for example, and we're all on the field because someone has helped us with the visa process and and knows what we need to do to pay our
Yeah.
taxes and everything we need to do to stay compliant in the country. And those things have to happen so that this other work can also happen. And that's part of the Great Commission too, is the enabling
Yep.
of the Great Commission. So I think it's important to remember that sometimes metrics are only measuring the front lines, but those front lines are enabled by a bunch of backline people.
Yeah, let's pause on that for a minute because I don't think it's talked about enough, but yeah, we have people like
Right.
do we pose the same metrics to those people, or should we try and have a different
Yeah.
metrics that we pose to those that are in those more administrative or behind the
Exactly.
scenes roles? Like, I haven't put a
No,
whole
that's
lot of thought
exactly
into
what I
this, but
was getting at. I
what do
do
you think?
think that we need to recognize that just like, running a church at home, we all hear the pastor preach and we can see the metric as the output of that Sunday, but there's someone running the soundboard. And we couldn't have heard the sermon without what that person was doing. And so there's all of these aspects in missions as well. And so as people are sending missionaries, I think it's good to, whether I am a frontline worker or moving into leadership and enabling work or on an administrative side or even a strategy side, to figure out ways to measure those contributions and connect them to the kingdom work, even if it's not the frontline work. So I think as organizations, we should think that through. And I also think, I know our mission organization is in the process of developing an app that I'm really excited about. I'd like to see more of this that enables us to kind of track in real time, because
Yeah.
when I go in to fill out my metrics, I go back through my calendar and I look at who did I meet with, how many appointments did I have, and I try and remind myself of things. But what that doesn't show is when I happen to pass my neighbor in the courtyard and I hear that, her husband broke his hip, and I say, "Hey, how can I help?" And I ask if I can do some shopping for them, or tell them I'm praying for them. And sometimes, actually, most of the time, what I think are my most significant gospel interactions and conversations are not things that I had in my agenda. They're the things that don't show up. So what this new
Mm.
app is going to enable is that kind of real time. It's going to give missionaries right at their hands, in their fingertips, anytime they have a gospel opportunity, to enter that in, just for themselves to see and later help with the tracking and reporting, or to share more broadly. So I think it'll help us be more honest, in the positive sense, right? Like, I'm not trying to lie if I forget that I had that interaction with my neighbor. It's just that it wasn't in my agenda. And if I'm filling out metrics once every 2 months, I'm not going to be able to pull all that stuff up immediately. So two things that, we just underlined, Jesse. One is that um, the metrics that just ask about the actual on the ground gospel preaching, teaching, witnessing conversations is enabled by other layers of workers that maybe need a different set of metrics. And then also the methods that we're using to measure
Yeah.
the metrics, the tools that we're using to measure our metrics, can also help us be better at this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it kind of in wrapping that up, I think the other part that's important is
Mm,
conversations alongside, because you can have written data or number data, but
right.
then because we're dealing with people, if we also are having
Yeah,
conversations
totally.
person to person, um, that makes a world of difference in interpreting and understanding. So it's as important what we measure, um, to think
Exactly.
through how do we
Yeah.
interpret what we're measuring. And I think that has to happen in conversation as we get to especially leaders. um, Even just a brief story as we conclude. I remember a while back there was a leader within our organization who they were more on the
Hmm.
side of advancement and raising funds for the mission. um, and so they used the stories of metrics to also try and share as they spoke in churches and stuff. But I remember he came into me and asked to have a conversation about one of the stories and to
Mm,
get a fuller understanding of what happened before he went and
right.
shared. And
That's
I
really
thought
good.
I appreciated that, because I
Yeah.
think I think that's important. But Yes, metrics matter. Uh, we should be measuring what we're doing and trying to find the best ways to do that wisely, to interpret it well, and
Hmm.
to adjust what we're doing and to become more effective as a
Yeah.
result of what we've been learning from our metrics. So it's been good. Thanks so much, Jenn, for the work you put into this dissertation. It's been fun working on that, and we look forward to having Alessandro back with us soon. Well, that's it for today. Thanks, everyone. Thank you to all our listeners. We'd love to hear from you. Whether you're a missionary or a donor or a family of a missionary or sending church, write us, respond on Spotify, share with us what information you'd like to hear from us, what kind of things you'd like to hear us discuss, and also just feedback, thoughts that you've had on what we've been talking about. We'd love to engage with you in those comments. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Going Where God is at Work.